Most Ford owners don't realize they're slowly killing their transmission. I've seen drivers get scammed, overcharged, and completely misled by simple mistakes that could have been avoided. One bad habit can turn a smooth ride into a $5,000 repair. I'm RJ. I've been working on Fords for over 20 years, from old Rangers that refuse to die to brand new F-150s that people somehow ruin in 6 months. I've seen every kind of transmission failure you can imagine. Today I'll walk you through 10 things you should never do in an automatic Ford if you want to avoid major transmission repair and keep your vehicle running strong for years. Number 1. Shifting into park while the car is still moving. If there's one habit I regularly see that kills transmissions, it's shifting an automatic Ford into park while the vehicle is still rolling. Trust me, that's not a minor mistake, and that's why it's number 1. Inside every automatic transmission in a Ford, whether it's an EcoBoost-powered F-150 or a 5.0-liter Coyote Mustang, there's a little metal part called a parking pawl. When you shift into park, the pawl drops into a notch on a gear and locks the output shaft so the vehicle won't roll. But here's the problem. If you shift into park while moving, that gear is still spinning. The pawl isn't designed to engage a moving gear. If you make this mistake, it can get bent, broken, or the gear teeth can shear or round off. In fact, doing this a couple times will eventually kill your transmission. I've talked to plenty of owners who thought it wasn't a big deal, only to come into the shop with transmission issues. One customer said, "I only went 5 miles per hour when I shifted into park by mistake, and everything seemed fine," but then he noticed that his car made a horrible grinding sound. Even if he drove home okay, he might have damaged the parking pawl slightly. If it happens again, it could seriously damage the transmission. On a Ford automatic, especially trucks with high torque outputs, like the 3.5 EcoBoost, or the 10-speed automatics in newer F-150s, the forces are even greater. You don't want your transmission to deal with that kind of shock. Repairing or replacing a transmission or the internal park lock gear is expensive, and instead of a small fix, you might be paying thousands. Instead, you should always come to a complete stop before shifting into park. Apply the brake firmly, let the vehicle roll to a halt, shift into park, and then engage the parking brake. It takes 1 extra second and avoids a costly mistake. If you've already made the mistake, pay attention to any odd sounds when shifting, or if the car doesn't stay locked in park when you're on a slight incline. Ask a professional for help. It's best to have the pawl and lock gear inspected. But park isn't the only setting that can affect your driving. Even roughly shifting gears can affect your automatic Ford. Number 2. Shifting from reverse to drive or vice versa without stopping. If you drive a Ford with an automatic transmission, there's a mistake I see way too often that will cut the life of your transmission if you do it. And that's shifting from reverse to drive or vice versa without coming to a complete stop. Here's why this drives me nuts. Inside automatic transmissions in Fords, like the 10-speed in modern F-150s or the 6-speed units in older models, you've got clutch packs, bands, and gear sets that are built to handle torque in a specific direction. When you shift from reverse to drive while you're still moving, you're putting immense pressure on the transmission. The transmission has to reverse its rotation almost instantly, and the internals don't have time to spin down and realign. This forces clutch packs and bands to lock and unlock under load. This kind of stress will eventually wear out all these parts faster than they should. I always tell my customers that abusive shifting is one of the root causes of slipping, harsh shifting, or complete failures. One of my customers told me they heard a clunk when they shifted from reverse to drive while rolling, and the next thing they knew, the transmission was behaving strangely. This customer drives a Ford with the 10-speed transmission and realized that what he did created extra stress and heat that wore out some parts which then needed replacement. If you want to prevent this, you don't even have to spend much. Bring the Ford to a complete halt, keep your foot on the brake, make sure the transmission is settled, and then shift from reverse to drive, or vice versa. It only takes an extra second or two and won't put any extra stress on your transmission. Whenever you're about to shift roughly, just remember that the transmission is one of the most expensive components to repair. In many Fords, a transmission rebuild can cost $4,000 or even more. And if you're trying to save fuel by coasting in neutral, just know that that's a myth that can destroy your transmission. Number 3. Coasting downhill in neutral thinking you'll save fuel. Imagine, you're driving your Ford F-150 down a long hill. You shift into neutral thinking that you'll save gas, roll down, and then pop it back into drive at the bottom. This is a common myth, and it's harmful for 2 key reasons. First, on modern, fuel-injected vehicles, coasting in neutral does not save fuel. When your Ford is in drive and you take your foot off the gas, the engine computer cuts fuel flow completely because the wheels are keeping the engine spinning. In neutral, the engine has to use fuel to idle, so you're actually using more gas. Second, and more dangerously, shifting back into drive at the bottom of the hill while you're still moving forces the transmission to violently re-engage, causing a huge shock to the clutch packs, bands, and gear sets. This can damage those clutch packs, bands, and gear sets, and these are all parts that Ford counts on for durability. I tell my customers that shifting back into gear while moving will stress the transmission, and this can be prevented. Aside from putting stress on your transmission, you can also lose the built-in engine braking feature that most Fords have. This is one thing you should never do if your Ford is a heavy truck or used for towing. Instead of the engine slowing down the vehicle, you end up relying more heavily on your brakes, causing them to overheat and wear faster. So, next time you're going downhill, keep the car in drive. Let the engine remain engaged so the engine is connected to the wheels. Depending on your Ford, you can select a lower gear, low or 2, or use a tow or haul mode to allow the engine to act as a brake. So, you might be trying to save fuel, but making this mistake can cost over $4,000. On the next tip, where driving through water is another thing you should never do in an automatic Ford. Number 4. Driving through deep water or submerging the transmission's ventilation. Don't let the movies fool you, because driving your car through deep water comes with consequences for your engine and transmission. For automatic Fords, driving through deep water or letting the transmission vent get submerged will kill the transmission faster than you'd think. When you drive an automatic Ford, whether it's a 6-speed or a 10-speed F-150 or any automatic in an Expedition or Explorer, the transmission has a small vent tube or breather. That breather allows pressure to escape as the fluid heats up and the casing expands. But if the vent tube is submerged in water, the water can enter the transmission fluid. When water enters the transmission fluid, it gets contaminated. The moisture mixes with the fluid, causing friction plates to slip and clutches to stick, which leads to internal corrosion. In fact, just an ounce of water can cause problems in an automatic transmission. On Ford trucks, especially heavy-duty ones or those used off-road, the risk is real. I've seen trucks that drove through floodwaters, then weeks later the owner comes complaining of weird shifting, slipping gears, or hesitation. For example, one of my customers saw a pinkish foam on their dipstick and experienced rough shifts. Instead, you should avoid driving through water where you can't see the road, especially if the water is higher than the bottom of your doors. If you must cross deep water, get your Ford serviced immediately afterward. Flush the transmission fluid, replace the filter, and top up with the correct Ford specification automatic transmission fluid. Once water gets in, the life of that transmission drops dramatically. It's better to spend about $200 and change the fluid right after the incident, rather than wait and end up paying 20 times that. This takes me to another mistake that you should definitely not make, which is neglecting the transmission fluid. Number 5. Neglecting transmission fluid level and condition. If there's one thing that kills automatic transmissions, it's neglecting the fluid level and condition. If you want your Ford to outlast what's typical, you can't ignore the transmission fluid. The transmission fluid in your Ford is doing a ton of work. It controls clutches, bands, gear shifts, cools, and keeps things operating smoothly. When the fluid drops too low, gets dirty, or you use the wrong type, the transmission starts struggling. Dirty fluid loses its ability to protect the transmission, and if there's low fluid, it exposes all the internal parts to heat and wear. The wrong type is even worse and might damage it altogether. I've seen Fords come in rough shifting, slipping gears, or even total failure. Many of these can be traced back to ignored fluid checks. Some of my customers told me that their dipstick read below the proper level, and They soon had transmission problems. It's best to check the fluid often, especially if you drive under heavy load, in high heat, or in stop-and-go traffic. So what do I recommend you do? First, check your transmission fluid every oil change, around 7,500 miles or 5,000 miles if you tow. For many Fords with a dipstick, you should check it regularly and see if it's at the full mark or not. Also, use only the type fluid specified by your Ford, and if the fluid looks dark, smells burnt, or has bubbles, replace it. A fluid change can easily be done at home with basic tools like a socket set, drain pan, new fluid, and a funnel or filler pump. And it should take about 2 hours. Also, don't believe the myth that transmission fluid is for life. This is misleading for real-world users. If you're finding this helpful, hit that like button. It helps the channel a lot. Number 6. Putting pressure on the gear selector. At number 6, another mistake that you might be making is casually resting your hand on the gear lever while driving. For Fords with a traditional mechanical shifter, this can cause wear over time. Inside the mechanism, or the shift linkage system, there's a mechanism designed for selecting gears. By applying constant pressure to the gear selector, you're putting unwanted force on the shift linkage or internal selector fork components. These parts are only meant to engage when you shift. As the linkage or selector fork is ground under the slight pressure, wear begins. It might result in a loose shifter or a slight grind when you shift gears, which might mean that the shift linkage is worn out. It's worth noting that this is less of an issue on modern Fords with electronic shifters, where the lever is just a switch. But for many models on the road, it's a good habit to break. So when you're driving your Ford, keep your hands on the steering wheel and not the shifter. Only touch the gear selector when you're actually shifting. If you notice that the shifter feels loose or the indicator doesn't match the gear, get professional help. Repairing these parts only costs a few $100s, but if you ignore them, the stress can spread to the transmission and then cost more to fix. Number 7. Launching the car aggressively. The number 7 mistake that many Ford users make is launching their car aggressively, like revving the engine in neutral and then dumping it into drive, or doing burnouts from a stop. It seems like fun at the moment, but if you do it too much, it can cost you big in transmission repairs. When you launch aggressively in a Ford automatic, you're putting an enormous load on the torque converter, the clutch packs, and the bands inside the transmission. Normally, the gearbox engages gradually. But when you rev high or dump into drive hard, that internal system has to absorb a shock. One of my customers who owned an Explorer ST ended up with a transmission failure because he was rough on his car often. What you can do about this is simple. Treat your Ford's transmission with respect. Let the engine idle or run at a moderate RPM while in drive, and give the transmission a second to engage smoothly before flooring it. If you genuinely want performance, consider if your truck or car is built for that type of driving. If not, the small thrill isn't worth a multi-$1,000 repair later. If you've already done hard launches and start noticing slipping, delayed shifts, or weird clunks, get your fluid checked and inspect for overheating damage and clutch pack wear before it completely fails. Number 8. 2-foot driving. Another mistake that you should never make in an automatic Ford is 2-foot driving. This is a major safety risk and can also damage your Ford down the road. When you drive with both feet in an automatic Ford, you're less likely to react cleanly because your brain is split between pedals. In a panic situation, you could slam both feet down, causing uncontrolled braking and acceleration. It's a dangerous habit. Many drivers keep their left foot lightly resting on or hovering over the brake pedal while driving. On a Ford, that slight pressure means the brake is partially engaged all the time, even when you're accelerating. That constant drag causes your brakes to drag, warms up the calipers, overheats the brake fluid, and causes premature wear. When the brake pads are lightly pressed all the time, they generate heat. On Fords with heavier engines like the 5.0-liter Coyote, or when towing, that extra heat spreads through the drivetrain and brakes. Over time, this can lead to warped rotors, fading brakes, and while the transmission isn't the primary victim, it does have to work slightly harder against the dragging brakes. So, use one foot, your right foot, for both the brake and the accelerator. Place your left foot on the dead pedal if your Ford model has one, or simply on the floor. Focus on clean transitions, like taking your foot off the gas, then applying the brake. For automatic models, there's no need for the left foot. If you've developed the 2-foot habit, start consciously lifting your left foot away. If you already suspect you've been riding the brake on your Ford, check your brake pad and rotor condition. Listen for squeal or a pulsating feeling. Review your driving habits and consider a brake inspection. Looking after this simple habit will save you thousands. Number 9. Excessive idling. Many people think that excessive idling is harmless, but this is a mistake that you should definitely ditch in an automatic Ford. While not a direct transmission killer, it causes significant wear and tear on your engine, which affects the whole vehicle. Idling means the engine doesn't reach or maintain its optimal temperature. You can end up with incomplete fuel combustion, more deposits, and extra wear. For example, when fuel doesn't burn fully, it can leave deposits on cylinder walls, spark plugs, exhaust components, and even contaminate engine oil. Once I saw a Ford truck that came in with oil that looked darker than it should, with the spark plugs fouled and a rough idle. The owner assumed it was just from waiting, but in reality the wear had already been stacking. An hour of idling is like 10 miles of driving in terms of engine wear. If you're stopped for more than a minute or two and don't need the engine running, shut it off. When you start your Ford, let it warm up briefly, then drive. Don't let it sit idling, thinking that it helps. Also, avoid prolonged idling with accessories on because that adds load with no forward momentum. It takes little or no special tools, just make it a habit. Number 10. Unnecessary performance mods. And finally, if you want to keep your automatic Ford running a long time, then you should avoid unnecessary performance mods. The vehicle is engineered with a carefully balanced set of components, and this is tied together with factory calibrations. So, if you add heavy engine or transmission tuning mods when they're not needed, or if they're not done with all the supporting upgrades, you upset the balance. You increase power output, but you also increase strain on the transmission, torque converter, cooling system, and other components. The result is decreased reliability, shorter component lifespan, worse fuel economy, and risks to warranty and safety. A lot of Mustang and EcoBoost owners have installed big tuning software without supporting hardware, and they end up with transmission or brake troubles. So, instead of jumping into big performance mods, consider taking care of your car first. Maintain factory specifications for filters, fluids, servicing, cooling, and tires. Cosmetic upgrades are also safer as long as they don't alter transmission behavior. If you really want to go faster, plan it properly and ask a professional for help. For automatic Fords, remember that the transmission is less forgiving than a manual, and it doesn't like unexpected extra power. All these are things that you should never do in an automatic Ford, as they would definitely kill your transmission. Remember to flush transmission fluids regularly, and be nice to your gearbox to avoid major repairs. If you want more real advice for Ford owners, make sure to subscribe. And check out my next video, where I share engine additives that will destroy your Ford and additives that I trust.